This is Pivotal Moments. Those tiny moments, those 1 degrees of change that make all the difference. That's perfect.
Boston Computer Exchange, 1980 something.
Yeah. Are you in this picture?
That one,
That one there.
that
It-
guy.
it-
Yep.
it-
And this guy's an interesting character. Um, he was a public relations wizard and PR'd us, did a bunch of getting us into media. But the thing that was really clever, just one day he was talking to us, he said, "You've got all these numbers. You know how many people bought one of these or one of those IBM PCs this week and Macintoshes, well, whatever it was, we knew who wanted them and how much they were worth." And he said, "Why don't you write a report like every week, like it was the New York Stock Exchange, the index from the Boston Computer Exchange?" I'm like, I guess, sure. What are we going to do with that? Uh, and he said, just send that out as to the media, every week, just like news.
like a
And
press
we
release.
we started to publish this thing called the BOCOEX Index, BOCOEX. And every media channel we sent it to published it. Uh, at that point in time, the dominant computer magazine was a thing called PC Week. And there was a thing called Computer World and PC World.
PC
And
World, yeah.
all of them picked it up. All of them picked it up for something like 5 or 6 years. PC Week magazine had the Boston Computer Exchange Index on page 2. You'd open the cover page and turn, and down at the bottom, right next to the little block that said who the publisher was and who the editors were, right next to that would be the Boston Computer Exchange Index, IBM high, low closing price on the Boston Computer Exchange. The space in the magazine, had we purchased it, would have cost us $10,000 a week. Instead, we
Wow.
got it for free. Computer World ran us in the news section. Everybody ran it as news. We were so flabbergasted that it was treated as a news item where anybody else anywhere just running an ad that said we sell a thing for the, if we just said we sell them for this price, it would be an ad. But
Yeah.
because we had high, low, and closing price news,
Yeah.
it was sheer genius.
So
The
that's
the
kind of in the branding of the name exchange, kind of positions it like a marketplace rather than a place where you just buy and sell.
Correct. Correct. The fact that we positioned ourselves as being neutral traders in the industry rather than a store. And the word exchange popped up for us again later on. We at one moment in time, I thought it would really be clever to try and sell some of these computers. We've got stuff that gets to the bottom of the American market, and we really don't have a lot of people with demand for the earliest computers. 8 or 10 years after they're built, people are still buying them. But sooner or later, just the market's moved on. They want the newer one. And I thought, well, what we should do is sell these to the Russians. Let's just set up an operation in Moscow and sell them to the Russians. They're a rung lower on the ladder. And I went to Moscow to to a sort of trade fair with a big sign in Russian that said Boston Computer Exchange. Only the word exchange in Russian is birja. So it was the
Okay.
Boston Computer Birja. At the trade show, mobs of people stood around our booth pointing to the word and talking about it. And we couldn't quite understand they weren't coming to talk to us so much as they were talking to each other about that. And I'm probing my translator, what's going on here? Thousands of people standing in line to talk to us. Everybody wanted to talk to the people from the Boston Computer Birja. But then these groups that would sit there and talk and point to it and talk about it. It turned out that Lenin had outlawed the word birja back in 1917.
Oh,
And
wow.
we were the first people in Russia to use the word birja in public since the revolution.
That's a good way to get some free press.
All kinds of, well, it's worse. They hired me to be a consultant to the St. Petersburg Stock Exchange. They thought
Mm,
that since I understood what an exchange was, that I could explain to them how to create the stock exchange. It's just at the moment they were considering whether they could create a stock exchange. And I ended up back in St. Petersburg as a consultant to the St. Petersburg Stock Exchange,
wow. So
which
the word
was
exchange has been a powerful word for you.
it really it's a fascinating word because it carries this implication that this is the marketplace. And I've since realized that in a lot of things, if you simply make a declaration, we are the exchange. Um, I've found since if I was assigned a building to work in at the University of the Virgin Islands, and I went out in the first couple of weeks and put some signs out that said parking for the radio station, and nobody would park in those spaces. I always had parking just because I put the signs up. So it's a lot of life has to do with who puts the sign up. And if
Mm,
you put the sign up and you say, I'm the one, we declared this is basically what Cami and I did in the first day of the computer exchange is we said, we're the people who are the traders. We know who wants them and we know who has them.
mm.
And we can negotiate a trade. Just making the declaration, we are the people who do that, is enough to become the thing. All you have to do is make the declaration. It's
Be
crazy.
confident with that thing.
Yeah. Right. Well,
So
we present ourselves. And if you present yourself as a store, you're a store. But if you present yourself as an exchange, and you look at this building, there are no computers in here. They're the ones we use to run the business, but there's no inventory. There's no warehouse. At no
yeah,
point in time did the Boston Computer Exchange ever own a warehouse or take possession of anything.
it was just information.
That that is the essence of it, Tate. We started we started in a situation where we physically couldn't take inventory. Everybody around us had a computer store. We were working out of a basement apartment, which is all my wife and I could afford at that moment in time is to live in a basement apartment. And we couldn't take inventory. There's no physical way to handle boxes coming in and out of this place. And we said, well, we have to have something else, knowing who has it. And that idea of creating an information business where the business only owns information. It happens in real estate, right? They don't bring the houses in because they're going to
Yeah,
sell the house, right? It
yeah,
stays where it is, but they know where it is and they know how much it's worth. And it happens in the stock exchange where there's nothing really being traded except the idea. I'll give you some ideas about this company.
yeah.
Let me give you some ideas about that company. Well, here's some ephemeral paperwork, not even paper, it's just,
Yeah,
database.
I guess when you can't hold the thing, the only way to trade it is with ideas or with concepts. Um,
Hmm.
and the abstraction of the thing from the actual trade has to happen in real estate. And I guess, because computers are expensive and big and bulky, especially in the 80s, it made complete sense to abstract them away like houses and treat them in the same way as real estate.
We in 1981 we decided we were only going to be in the personal computer business. We only wanted to deal with things that we could carry, just that people could carry. And
Yeah,
it's interesting because just a few miles away from us in Kenmore Square, there was a business that was a warehousing business for mini computers, basically the used mini computer business. And they were all about inventory and they were all about physical possession. And we'd heard about them and went, that's not the way to go. Opening up a big warehouse and saying we're going to take a whole bunch of computers in.
yeah.
And
Nowadays, those are two separate businesses. Like that's a standard, is to have a warehousing kind of operation or a third party logistics setup. And then websites almost became exchanges in a way. And then people can choose to hold stock, or they can have kind of fulfilled stock, or managed it that like through a third party now, can't they?
virtual inventory. It's all
Yeah.
about virtual inventory.
So, just to give you a quick rundown, because we launched straight in, of the structure of the podcast. Um, so there's three parts. So the past, the present, and the future. So I wanted to just go through each of those. We've started talking about the past, and it's mega insightful. So we'll continue down that one in a minute, and then I want to talk about your pivotal moment as well as as an actual concept. So like in the formation of the Boston Computer Exchange, or perhaps in the success of it, and what it itself is a pivotal moment in kind of the history of computing and e-commerce. Um, so I won't go into that straight away, but we can go back into the past. But I wanted to introduce with the structure, and then kind of go into each of the separate bits. So the first thing I wanted to ask in the past is about the inception of the Boston Computer Exchange. So you mentioned in our prep call before this um, about how you wrote on the cards and you went along to computer fairs and it was all paper and pen to begin with, and how that evolved. Would you mind explaining that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah, for a second. Um, I have to go back to the moment right after I bought my first personal computer, which is 1981, August the 12th. I bought an IBM personal computer, 64K of memory, 120 megabyte, kilobyte floppy disks. From our standpoint now, these are stupid ancient machines. But it was transformative to me that things that I had never imagined myself doing, particularly writing articles and things, was impossible, and suddenly it became easy. Unfortunately, my wife was looking over my shoulder all the time as I was working on my personal computer, doing all these cool things that I was doing, and she wanted one too.
Yeah.
And we went into the newspaper ads looking for a used computer because we couldn't afford to buy a second one. First one was like $7,000. And we couldn't afford to do that a second time. And we found that the newspaper ads were utter chaos, that the descriptions were all over the place and pricing was all over the place. Around about that time, I was asked to give a lecture at Princeton University about the social implications of personal computers. I had been studying these things, but I didn't own one. And after I owned one and fiddled around with it a lot, one of my professors said, "Come down and talk to my engineering students about what you think the social implications of personal computers are." Pretty much the way people right now are talking about what are the implications of artificial intelligence. It was about the same kind of conversation. And I
Yeah.
had a lecture in front of 100 engineering students at Princeton University, real smart kids. And I asked, yeah, okay, so, here's what these things are going to do to us, and this is what society, how we're going to adapt. How many of you own personal computers? Offhand question in the middle of the lecture. How many of you own a personal computer? Three hands.
Wow.
I was flabbergasted. I was absolutely dumbstruck. I stopped in my tracks and I was thinking to myself that if these kids who are relatively wealthy and relatively intelligent don't own this stuff, the computer revolution hasn't even started yet.
No, it was
All
right
right. It's just,
at the
it hasn't
curve.
even, it was just this flabbergasting. My God, it hasn't gotten going. I thought I was behind. Right. I thought I was one of the late. No, no, I was a real early adopter. I just didn't notice it. On the way home from that lecture, I stopped on the roadside, dropped quarters into the telephone to call my wife and say, we need to create a marketplace where people can buy and sell these things because the prices are crazy and these kids don't own this stuff yet. And by the time I got home, couple hours later, she had drafted up these two cards. I want to sell, I want to buy with the names of the physical cards, manufacturer, amount of RAM, size of disk drives, how much you want to sell it for, special features, your phone number.
You don't still have those, do you?
I don't have one in my hand right now. I've got one across the room, but I'll get you a picture of it in a minute.
That'll be
Uh,
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I have the original cards are funny, and they just you look at them now and the handwriting of the people selling an Apple One, people selling the original, and this you also have to understand this era, 1981, that the standards hadn't been established at all. Windows didn't exist.
You were creating them.
The internet was still a university thing. Uh,
Mm.
um, you couldn't do a credit card transaction online. It's just the facilities to do it didn't exist.
Mm.
Uh, and the original cards, we would go to meetings of the Boston Computer Society, which was a user group, and they had different meetings for the Osborne user group here and the Tandy Radio Shack user group there, and the people who each of the different brands and the different operating systems had user groups. And we go to those and say, if you want to sell your computer, fill in one of these. If you want to buy a computer, fill in one of these. And everybody at every meeting came up to us. Everyone, 100% of the population had something they wanted to get rid of and something that they wanted to get.
Mm.
Everyone had something in their closet.
I
And that
think that
was just,
stands true today.
but nobody, there was no mechanism
Mm.
to unload the thing that you bought. And the technology is changing quickly enough that what you bought last week had the manufacturer's got a new model out within months. A new model. Oh, our new one has bigger floppy drives. Our new one has a hard drive. Everybody had something to get rid of. And we literally were matching cards on the living room floor. Oh, this guy wants to sell an Apple One for $1,000. Oh, here's somebody who wants to buy, back and forth, make a few phone calls. The business made money in the first week.
Mm.
We were just charging a commission on the transactions, and literally people were putting their computers in taxis and sending them across town to the buyer. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, so it immediately took off. It was something everyone needed. So it's a pivotal moment. I was imagining myself teaching at universities, and here I was suddenly swept into um, some kind of commerce, trading, negotiating. Um,
Yeah.
Side
So
the woman sitting right here at the desk. This is my then wife, Cameron Hall.
oh
Uh,
wow.
I subsequently lost her to cancer, but for the first years of the computer exchange, or for all the years of the computer exchange, she and I were side by side at the desks at the end of the room here.
Yeah.
Um, Working eyeball to eyeball, having conversations about the business in bed at 3 a.m., hugging in the office. And we were just together 24 hours a day doing this business.
Oh,
Um,
would you say that I'm really sorry to hear about your loss, but would you say that she was essential for it sounds like she was really supportive, and to have come up with the idea of the cards, I want to buy, I want to sell as soon as you got home, sounds like she was right in there with you making this happen.
we were an extraordinary mix, and we had run two businesses before. She and I met when I was running a t-shirt business, which
Oh, really?
I bootstrapped that one out of nothing too.
That's how
Uh,
I started too.
Really,
Yeah, t-shirt business.
I had the first hot press on the East Coast of the United States, the machine
Wow.
that could imprint a heat transfer ink from a piece of paper onto a shirt. And in 1974, I think that was really new technology. And I saw a line of people standing in line at the university bookstore to buy these shirts. And I just went around to the back of the machine and copied the name of the manufacturer down, went back to my dorm room, made a phone call to them. Within 2 hours of seeing the machine, I owned one. And she and I ran that business for years. And it was a standard model. I'm the PR guy. I stand up and go, "Come on in, everybody! The shirt wizard's in.
Yeah.
Notice his fingers never leave his hand. I'm going to magically make these shirts happen." And she'd stand there collecting the $20 bills. And she has a degree in economics, right?
Mm.
So she's a master of economics. I'm a PhD in systems theory. So we were a match where we filled the role that the other person needed.
Yeah,
And we
totally. I
mapped it.
understand that.
And it mapped into, we've had 5, 6 different businesses, the two of us. And always the same. I was out ballying in a crowd and
Yeah.
she was collecting the money. And the computer exchange, she ran the business side of the thing. She handled the funds,
Operations.
and I made sure that the phones rang every day. The kids who worked at this place, this guy, I just talked to this guy, his name's Jeff Day. I was just talking to him the other day. These people all remember this. Elizabeth Lozano over here. They all remember this as having been um, a seminal moment in their lives, that
Mm.
operating at the computer exchange, um, they all complained to me because the phones never stopped. This
Yeah.
business never placed an advertisement in its entire history, and it never made a single cold call, ever. The
It sounds like
phones
it
just,
was unique though.
the phones rang, right? When the story would run in the New York Times, the phones would ring for a week, just constant. And the kids were just like, you just pick the phone up and do a deal. Pick the phone up, do a deal. It was constant. It was amazing. But she had a particular skill set. She's an economist. She thinks like an economist. And the other piece of her story is that her father was one of the first people to ever work with a modem. He
Mm,
worked with a modem when they were a brand new concept coming out of AT&T, things with tubes and hundreds of wires. And he's there trying to figure out how do you send a signal down a phone line.
mm,
So when we got our very first computer, my father-in-law shows up and goes, here's a 300 bit per second modem. Let's figure out how to wire it into your personal computer. And we were there playing with online, whatever online was at that point in history.
mm.
Call a university computer and be able to do some email. It was really trivial,
Yeah,
but we
using
were
audio.
there cutting edge on that stuff.
Yeah.
And
So
that,
that was
of course,
probably a really crucial coming together of things because without the modem and without that kind of connectedness that you were able to get through your father-in-law, the business wouldn't potentially have evolved in that direction, would you say?
yeah. No, we would have been a paper and pencil business in the store if we hadn't it just had that moment of, well, you can do this stuff electronically, and finding out how little there was out there in what we now call the internet. There was nothing there.
Mm,
The earliest bulletin board systems were amazingly trivial content. Uh, the online service that we worked, an outfit called Delphi in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he had 100 modems. He was able to handle 100 clients simultaneously talking to his mini computer. Wow, that was really exciting. 100 people at once can be looking at this stuff, but he had no content. He
mm.
has a system, it can do some primitive email, but there was nothing in the store. And when I showed up and said, hey, we have this database of computer equipment that people want to buy and sell, he was like, whoa, we'll write you a special front end just so that we can showcase your database.
Oh wow, okay. So they built you a front end, and we skipped a bit about your database though because in
Oh,
our prep call we spoke about how you went from the paper version to the database version, and that helped you sort, organize, and speed up the process. So I think there's a few really crucial things that have happened here, which kind of create a bit of a blueprint for what we have now. If you look back, that was kind of you were innovating at the time, and now a lot of this stuff is pretty standard. So, do you want to quickly explain the sorting process
this
and how that
stuff,
evolved?
it all got to be standard. It's now, every business has a database. But at that point in time, when we opened up the Boston Computer Exchange, there were 14 stores in downtown Boston selling computers, brick and mortar storefronts. That's how you sold things in 1981. It's really hard for us to remember in this era when we PayPal stuff and you go to eBay, you go to Amazon. It's hard to imagine that everything was transacted in storefront businesses in 1981. 14 computer stores. And we had contemplated, why don't we open up a store? And we're looking around going, there are 14 here. It's kind of, crowded marketplace.
Mm.
Um, Literally, a guy walked through the door one day of my apartment and said, oh, I have this database management piece of software that we're noodling around with, right? It's not even a product yet. See if you can make it work. And we're talking about a floppy disk, right? Stick it in drive A and boot it up. And here's this menu of
Big
things
floppy
you can do.
disks.
I don't know, real primitive, simple system. And literally, two floppy disks, one has our data on it, right? We copied from the cards, type it all in, and the program, you put the program in drive A and call it up, the database manager, and the data disk in drive B. And then you had to take the program disk out once it knew what it's going to do a sort. You could take the program out and you'd put the sort disk in a blank disk, and
Wow.
then the computer would copy back and forth in order to sort the data. And then at the end of that, it would write back to your floppy drive the final database in sorted order. You look at that and go, we're talking floppy disks. It's
Yeah.
it's it's primitive.
And
Um,
then and
but
then
that was just that was revolutionary. Right? You talk about pivotal moments. That's pivotal when you switch from brick and mortar store with physical inventory to a virtual store doesn't even have a front door on the street with a database on a floppy disk.
and were you talking about in that database, did you have attributes of the computer? So RAM or
Oh,
number of floppy disk drives and like screen size and all that kind of thing.
all that kind of stuff. Color
Yeah.
monitor, graphics. Did it have the graphics card or just the text card? Right. The
Yeah.
IBM PCs in that era had text only, right? Green phosphor monitors, no graphics.
So product attributes are a really important part of e-commerce as well. And it sounds like you created the first kind of digitized product attributes, like sorting system. So filtration you get on the normally on the left-hand side of a website when you're kind of trying to isolate the product you want. This was the first or earliest version of that.
As you put it that way, I'm now looking back, was the 30 field database, manufacturer, model, amount of RAM, what kind of disk drives, each one of these is as an attribute, and then going through, then there's a notes section for all the miscellany that, this one's got the guys changed the cover or something.
Product
Uh,
description.
extra memory that's been added. But it's a long list of all the different possible attributes. And having to standardize the stuff. We don't even think about this now, but having to have it standardized. Is it I period, B period, M period, or IBM 3 letters? Is it
Yeah.
Hewlett Packard or HP? And that the era when this business were taking phone calls and putting data into the computer, the brokers all had a list of the acceptable terms, right? Hewlett Packard must be in as H-P so that it'll sort correctly.
Oh yeah.
The Hewletts are over here and the HPs are over there and the H-Ps are over there. You can't sort it.
Mm,
It doesn't, you got to get everybody to be in the same neighborhood so you can make a comparison. It's a lot of pieces to it. And
yeah.
it's there's another piece to this though that I was primed for this that is a guy in our family history, my father's best friend from grade school, who was an engineer and built a machine called ENIAC. You can look him up. He's a historic character, J. Presper Eckert. And Presper Eckert was my godfather and family friend from childhood. And as a little kid, 56 era, I got dragged into various places to see some of Uncle Press's machines, which, were huge. They occupied warehouses size spaces. And in my world, I had the word computer in my vocabulary from the earliest words I knew. I was thinking about computers when none of my friends even knew what they were. And
Mm,
that's it just goes into the history. It's like I was primed for it.
yeah.
I did not study computer science. I didn't think that didn't
It
look
was
like
just part
much
of your
fun.
reality early on. So you were
They
able to kind of think on top of it rather than it being a big thing for you. It was just, what can I do with this?
Right. What can I do with it? What can I do with it? And when I was trying to buy my first personal computer, I called up Uncle Press and said, "What do you think?" Here's this Apple thing, here's this Tandy Radio Shack thing, here's this radio, all these different makes and models and operating systems and the rest of that. Press Eckert said, this one from IBM with the 10 function keys is kind of interesting because it's got these function keys. We don't even know what they're going to do with them yet, but the idea that you can push a key and perform a function is really interesting. Hence, I bought an IBM personal computer because it had the 10 function keys.
Mm.
Go figure.
Yeah, and they're still there. I'm looking at them right now.
And they still do stuff, and you push alt and the function key and it does something different.
Yeah, but that was the earliest days of it.
But that's also, we worked that as soon as we knew they were there, we worked them into things that the various searches and sorts that we did, we all wrote function key programs to make the function keys do things we wanted them to do. And it was a factor that they had the ability to do that.
Yeah, that's really cool. So tell me about the first recorded digital transaction.
Okay. So, well, first off, we did our transactions by telephone. All right. The harsh reality, you couldn't do it. There's no such thing as a credit card transaction in 1981. You can't do that on computer. And you can't close a transaction on computer. Stuff you do in Amazon every day now just was impossible to be done. Such technologies weren't there.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so the movement from paper and pencil into a computer sorted database is one moment in time when we internalized it, made it all computer, and now we're looking at printouts of a database. That's a huge event for us. The second event that matters to us was the day we did, literally a friend came and said, "Hey, this online thing called Delphi's fun. You ought to go play with it." And we went out and joined Delphi, one of the 100 users, and figured out that they didn't have anything that looked like a database of computer equipment. And we negotiated, haggled up a deal with them. I'll give you the database for free. You don't charge me anything.
Hmm.
So we had a swap deal with no money going back and forth between us. He
To
looked at
add
me
value
like
to it.
my data looked like a magnet to him, that people would want to go look at this database, that this was attractive. We posted the database, and the next morning we got a phone call from Santiago, Chile, from a guy who wanted to buy one of the computers that he saw in the database. And this is a head exploding moment when you go, Chile?
Mm.
Santiago?
So how
Uh,
many was that? How many miles away is that? That's quite a distance.
I don't know, South America. It's the other end of the planet from my standpoint. You know, it's
Thousands.
my time zone, but South America. And I've been
Okay.
doing business with South Boston. You know, I was getting people to take things from Norwich to London. That's about as far as we were doing transactions. And suddenly we've got a buyer in Argentina, in Chile, in South America. We did the deal with them. It was amazing. But we also had that moment of going, this online thing is global, and we hadn't really gotten that yet. Nobody had it yet. The idea that online didn't care about national borders. Online doesn't care how far away. It doesn't mind what time zone you're in. It's on duty 24 hours a day everywhere on the planet.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Cami and I, the same lady and I, had spent 4 years teaching overseas, and we'd been in 40 countries in 4 years. So we had a really keen sense of what the rest of the world looked like. And the idea that we could do business with people in Japan was just, we were all set for that. We were wired up for, let's make that happen. So
Creating
we were
connections.
chasing that idea.
So with the guy from Chile, um, the deal happened over a phone call after he recognized the product, and then would he have paid by check or something like that? How would that have worked?
It's so primitive. It's laughable now. He sends me a check in the mail. I cash the check.
It's
I
it's not laughable.
transact.
It's impressive.
Tell the person who owns the computer to put it in a box and mail it to this address in Chile. And
Yeah.
what the shipping cost was for that. And when he gets the computer and he's happy with it, we release the money to the seller. We did that for 15 years.
So
Same,
you were
same.
also an escrow service.
Oh, that turned out to be the most lucrative part of the business. Escrowing the money, $20 escrow fee. Phew.
So
And
yeah,
along the way, the computer exchange in escrow is holding this astronomical amount of money, more than any of us had ever imagined, that the people who are buying stuff and sending us money that we don't have to pay out for 30 days, just holding that in the bank and earning interest on it was an astronomical, another one of these ones we didn't know, the escrow fee.
hmm
And the third one, that's just, it's so funny to look back at it now, that after we had started to publish the computer exchange report, the weekly report on the closing prices, people would call us like, "Oh, I'm a lawyer and we're settling an estate here and we need to know what this computer is worth. How much does it cost to appraise it?" I'm like, I could have told you over the phone what it was worth for free, but you're asking me if you can pay for an appraisal. This kid over
Mm.
here turned into the appraisal queen. This
All
person
right.
spent the rest of her time with the computer exchange simply performing $25 appraisals. We're
And then
literally
you
we're just looking in the database and going, that's what this one's called, and sending out a a postcardish thing that says this is what it's worth.
the kind of a
Everybody,
high and low, and then you took the average.
oh, we would give them the high, low, and the closing price. But it was just, it's comical. You don't notice. This is so important for business, is that you don't notice when you're starting where opportunities will arise that are profitable. Oh, that there's a business. I could have
Yeah,
just been in the
just
appraisal
do that.
business and done
Well,
nothing else.
$25 in 1982 would be a fair amount now, wouldn't it, as well? It wouldn't be just $25.
It was enough then.
Yeah.
At that point in time. This kid's a Mount Holyoke College graduate. She was really smart, and she was like, "Oh, I can just do this." Great.
Yeah.
How about it?
Yeah. Wow. So the business
No,
kind of unraveled itself and and showed itself to you as you I mean that happens with a lot of businesses. As long as you are looking for opportunities constantly, which it seems that you're the kind of guy who does that.
I think one of our secrets was we never had a business plan.
Yeah.
I talk
If
to
you stick to that too
entrepreneurs all
much.
the I talk to entrepreneurs all the time. It's like, well, we have to write the business plan. It's like that's what they taught you in business school. I didn't go to business school. I didn't
Mm,
write a business plan. And
neither
so
did I.
but I'm bootstrapping the whole time. But it also means that you aren't constrained.
Mm.
I could have written the business plan for this thing with the paper and pencil database and done that for decades, but I didn't. And so when the opportunity to go online arose, yeah, sure. It's not like I'm breaking anything in the plan. I'm inventing again.
But you were able to stay in that place as a visionary because you had Cameron. She was
Oh, oh,
she was able to wrap a business plan around all of your ideas, right? And you became like a
exactly.
yin yang.
It's exactly it. We did it well, we were together for 25 years and we did it a half a dozen different times. Okay, same lady. You're looking at this space, right? This office. One of the things we figured out when we were getting going, when we were still in the basement, was this business could fail. It could run for 6 months and die. So we can't hang our hats on it. And when we needed more space, rather than renting an office, she said, what we need to do is to buy an office condominium. So we purchased the space on the theory that even if the business fails, the real estate will do okay.
Mm, it's a good idea.
It was seminal. It was one of those. We ended up buying the building next door and the space below us that was the street front and the one across the street. You can see one across. We ended up with three buildings in the neighborhood,
Wow.
which in the end that saved us from a worser disaster. She and I also see, this is also about how you don't notice when you're starting where the other opportunities are. That once we'd been running for a chunk of time, about 10 years, it got to be evident to me that there was stuff falling out of the bottom, right? That the
Hmm.
lowest machines, the least desirable to Americans, were still operational and still do everything that they did when they were invented. They're just not desirable to Americans who want the faster, newer. So what do you do with the stuff at the bottom?
Yeah.
We've got the kids here going, well, nobody wants to buy this Apple II anymore. Oh, okay. It's like it's over. There's no market for it anymore, but they're still out there.
Mm.
And she and I noodled up the idea of creating a nonprofit, right? Just give us the stuff. So we invented a nonprofit organization called the East West Foundation, and East West Foundation uh, took in donations of computer equipment, refurbished what needed to be refurbished. It was physically taking possession of the computers, which is like violation of the rules, but it was a different enterprise with different
Yeah.
operations. And we
Yeah.
took the stuff in and would repackage it. All right, this guy's printer and that guy's monitor and this guy's CPU, and we put the stuff together and make a working system out of it, box it up, and we could send it anywhere in the world. Any nonprofit organization could get computer equipment from us.
Oh
Uh,
wow. So you were an exchange between people wanting to do good and then kind of donating the technology to nonprofits.
Donate us the technology, we'll get it into the hands of someone who can use it.
Nice.
And organizations, on one hand, were organizations that would give us their computer equipment and I'd say, if you're going to give me 20 computers, give me a list of the nonprofits you like and we'll try and get some of them to that organization. And other organizations came to us saying, we'll fund you if you can send computers to the organizations we like. So we had
Mhm.
equipment donors and we had money donors. And between the two, we came up with a list of who got computers.
It's a
Um,
great idea.
we had a huge grant from an organization in the States called the National Endowment for Democracy, which was in the business of supporting democracy, little d democracy, voting for your government, that idea.
Which wasn't
And
computerized at the time, probably.
oh, every one of their grantees around the planet wanted money to buy a computer at, $7,000, $8,000 a piece. And I said, give me a chunk of cash, I'll send them computers for free. They'll just get it. There'll be no transaction. They'll just have a box show up on the doorstep. Give me a chunk of money. They gave us a $500,000 and gave us a list of the organizations they liked, and we sent computers all over the planet. Anybody between Berlin and Vladivostok in the former Soviet Union or Eastern Europe could get computers from us if they were trying to make democracy happen. And, I can step
Nice.
back now, decades later, and go, the fact that there's democracy in Poland or in the Czech Republic or Hungary, all of which are places where sort of, voting for your government's actually working. All the
Mm.
organizations that are making it happen in this country, they're all places that we send computers to. The Nobel laureate that just got the Nobel Prize in Moscow just a year ago, Memoria. We sent computers to them when they were a one-person operation. They just won the Nobel
Yeah.
Prize.
It
So,
sounds like when you're when you're at that early adopter first part of the curve of innovation and everyone recognizes it and you hit the curve at the right point, which is obviously what you did, it can also resonate with other things that are hitting the curve at that same point. And so you become pivotal or seminal to lots of other things growing and expanding and kind of hitting that higher end of early, like kind of mass adoption later on. Yeah.
possibly, fortunately for me, I'd done a research study as a graduate student on a topic called the diffusion of innovation, which is, I still think, one of the most interesting things going on. Every new idea begins in the idea of one person. Every single one, all throughout human history, they all start in the idea of one person. One guy's got the idea. Who's the second person? Does the second person get it? If the second person doesn't get it, the first person goes, this is stupid, and they drop the idea. If the second
Mm.
person goes, that's interesting, let's talk about that, and they can get a
Mhm.
third person to get in, now you've got a crew. Seven
Mhm.
people and you can take over the world. Seven people buying your idea is enough to get it going wherever you care to take it.
Oh, I'd
It's
love to
just
read
one of
that.
those.
You did a paper on it?
I didn't do the paper on it. I can give you the references on the books on this. There's a guy named Everett Rogers who did the research back in the 1950s and 60s on the adoption of new technologies, which is fascinating. And
Yeah, that
what
is.
the S-shaped curve, where
Yeah.
you start off with one or two people, and then you hit an early adopter, right? I'm an early adopter, and then you hit an information leader or an opinion leader, and then the early adopters turn into the mainstream adopters, and then later adopters, and then laggards. And there's this curve. Well, how you get from one person to two people, right? The computer exchange, I had this crazy idea, but my wife immediately picked up on it, went, wow, we could do that.
She believed
All
in you.
right. The second person didn't say, honey, that's really stupid. Why don't you go back to your normal job?
Yeah.
Instead, the second person was like, yeah, sure, let's try that. We're entrepreneurs. Let's go start that. Makes
And that
all the
that
difference in
was
the world.
that moment where you unloaded some quarters in the phone box was probably the moment, I imagine, the one that started everything.
Coming away from that lecture and calling her, I had to drive. It was Princeton to Boston. It's a long drive. It's a 6-hour drive, and I was noodling over this thing the whole drive.
Thinking time in the car.
I have several stories in my life where I'm dropping quarters into a payphone to talk to something that was a seminal moment. There's several
Yeah.
of those, but this was the creating the computer exchange. But then this is the evolution. It doesn't just stand still. I could have stayed at the paper and pencil level. No, putting it in the computer, that was a moment, and taking the computer and making it, putting it online. Um, There was a big service in those days called CompuServe. It was the largest
Hmm.
online, which meant you were dialing in to talk to them. When they decided it was smart to create an electronic mall, a shopping center, we were the first door. And the same thing with Prodigy, which is another huge service. When they said, let's start at some kind of a marketplace, we were there ready to go. Uh, um,
So
yeah.
that was the kind of beginnings of the e-commerce that we know today. A little bit more of that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, those institutions, we're talking mid 80s. By the end of the 80s, when we get to just around 1989, 1990, that what we talk about as the internet now became possible, right? The technology had evolved to a point where we could have businesses put web pages up. Um, but just a bunch of stuff happened right at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, and it was like 97 when the internet, as we refer to it today, took off. But we were there, 20 years before that, playing around with this stuff, trying to, bootstrap it, put it together from chewing gum and paste.
Yeah.
um
Well,
now it's like put up a page.
yeah,
Every,
it's
everybody.
become easier now, but then the foundations of what you created then and what was happening around then, as an early adopter and as someone who was using all the technologies you could, it kind of creates the current present. So that kind of covers the past and the present. Um, because I think we talked about attributes and searchable elements on e-commerce sites, which is something that it sounds like you were innovating back then.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
we talked about the bottom of the, I guess not the bottom of the funnel, the bottom of the bucket, I guess, of what's not, well, there isn't a market so much anymore. I think that's innovative too, actually. I think that's a really great thing to have done. And it still kind of gets used today, with phones and things which are kind of aren't popular in the West. They'll often get donated to third world countries or places where they need that technology still. It still has a use. Um, just quickly before I go into the future and a couple of kind of philosophical questions, um, what's happening with what happened with East West Foundation? Did you hand the keys over to that to
Yeah.
anyone or?
I'm a startup guy and I want to get out of enterprises. Cammy and I took the t-shirt business that we ran, and after we did it as college students. But after we had a run with it, we sold the business. And that set the model for us that every business I'm a startup guy. I'm going to start it. I've got some crazy ideas. I'm going to try some stuff. I'll take all the risks. Once it's a going concern,
It's boring.
and I stayed with the computer exchange probably longer than I should have, but by 1990, I was fed up with it. Um,
Mm,
there's a funny moment in the middle of this when the Standard Oil Company came to us and asked us if we would help them create the Standard Computer Exchange. They had an idea that they would trade everything, buy, sell, trade, and that we seemed to be the people who were the leaders of that. And for several years, Standard Oil Company and the Boston Computer Exchange had an agreement to try and build this thing we called the Standard Computer Exchange. Unfortunately, they couldn't do it, and tied us down for a long time.
mm,
And as a consequence, we didn't create eBay. We were tracking to be the people who created something called eBay, um, which is amusing now because in this room that you're seeing behind me, a couple of students from Tufts University came in from the business school and studied us. Right. They did a business school kind of survey of how does this business work. And one of those kids went back to his dorm room and wrote the original eBay program. Right.
mm.
So in a sense, I consider myself the grandfather of eBay. But 1990, I was fed up with this business. I'd been doing
You
it
are
for
the
a long.
grandfather of eBay.
I am. Right.
Yeah,
And Piero Medjar, who is the person who created eBay, knows it because he's in this room with me at one point in time,
yeah.
uh, which is fine. That's great. As soon as he started eBay, it took a period of time for it to grow, but as soon as I saw what it was, it's like, oh, I'll buy shares of that. We were early investors in eBay.
Yeah.
Obviously, they figured out something we hadn't seen. But I sold the whole thing in 1990 to a big computer retailer who didn't quite understand what we were doing online, but looked at us like we were a way to get rid of inventory. So
Mm.
he never developed the buyer never developed the onlineness of it, never pursued the online database, which is just sad and tragic.
It
Um,
is, but what's interesting is although the entity that was the Boston Computer Exchange was sold to someone who maybe didn't recognize the future value of it, the value that it created in lots of people along the way has resonated indefinitely and still is resonating. So it's interesting how you mentioned you're you consider yourself the grandfather. I think probably the grandfather of quite a few things from the sound of it. So yeah, it's a shame that it didn't carry on as it was, but also it didn't necessarily need to from the sound of
no,
it.
it's all right. It's okay. I sold it. I happily sold it and walked away to do the East West Foundation, which I also handed over to somebody else. Right? When I got tired of doing that one, it was like, look around, find somebody who thinks uh, bootstrap entrepreneurs are looking around for people who are managers to take
Mhm.
over. Somebody who does not necessarily have creative thoughts so much as managerial, be here every day and make sure that it keeps running. Um,
Yeah, I
and there's a
understand
point in
that.
time when I just handed the thing over to somebody who was an accountant and somebody else who'd run a store. And it's like, you guys do this thing. And I'm
Probably
going
the
to,
reason, probably the reason why you stayed in the Boston Computer Exchange as long as you did was because for a while you were able to bootstrap new ideas within that container, which
yes,
kept you
exactly.
interested.
Exactly. I was in a position to continue to invent things.
Mm,
The things that I was competent to invent were still inventable. And that kept me on. It was like, this is fun. This is fun
yeah,
to come up with new stuff.
yeah.
In the end, we washed everything out, sold the computer exchange, sold the business, sold the buildings, sold everything. And I moved to the Virgin Islands. Just walked away from the entire enterprise. 1995, picked up, took the kids, moved to the Virgin Islands with no plan, no business, no idea what I was going to do. Just a nice house that we had always looked at and wanted to own was for sale, and we moved um, and stayed there for the next 20 years.
Was
And
it
I
because it was
bootstrapped.
sunny? Was
Uh,
it the weather or isolation or what were you looking for?
um, As a kid, I'd visited the Virgin Islands a bunch of times. My father was a sailor. And we always spent the last night in a particular harbor, and on the shore was a very nice piece of property. And I'd looked at it a lot of times and thought that would be a great place to live. Uh, what did it have? Sunshine was one thing. Disconnection from Boston was more important. Just, I'm not going to do that stuff anymore. I'm going to do something completely different.
You were
Uh,
thoroughly connected before.
at that moment, I had three kids and a sick wife, and
Mm.
that was a good combination. Um, uh, I showed up in the Virgin Islands literally without an idea of what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a business. I couldn't start the computer exchange over again in the Virgin Islands. There were only, 50 people who owned computers in the entire community. Um, and I bootstrapped something utterly, totally, completely different. I went into the local radio station and I turned myself into the good news guy. And
There is a market for that.
the leading radio station in St. Thomas has 70% of the audience. And I walked in and they bought my idea. And for 4 minutes every hour on the hour, I told you what was going right instead of what
Yeah.
was going wrong.
Yeah, that's the reason I don't listen to the news on purpose because of that, because it doesn't
It's so
exist.
depressing.
Good. So,
Fires, car crashes,
yeah.
politicians being corrupt, sports people that are in trouble. The news is awful. And I would
Yeah.
go through the press releases and simply pull out stuff that made me feel good and write my stories around what was going right, which
Oh,
was
I love that you did that. That's
it
great.
was an instant success. It was
Yeah.
an absolute instant success. The advertising space around my news product was sold out in the first week. The same story, right? Good idea in the right place at the right time. And
Yeah.
it hit. And from that, I segued into being the professor at their university, teaching radio, which is funny because I never took a course in that. I don't know
Oh, the
any.
best way to learn stuff is to teach it.
You got that right. And in the end, I was the chairman of the communication department and bootstrapped the university's radio station and bootstrapped their computer labs and bootstrapped their communication laboratories and bootstrapped the Museum of Obsolete Technologies and I don't know, kept inventing. I did that for 20 years. But
Yeah.
these are, you have to see these are utterly unrelated to one another. This is
Well,
all
you're the link between them all. I think your personality, the way you're looking for threads to pull, things that interest you, that's the thing that's tying it all together. So
looking for threads to pull. Very well said. Yes. Where the line that I use is there's a pebble somewhere on this mountainside, and if I just move the pebble, there will be an avalanche. All I have to do is to find that pebble.
find that
There's a
pebble.
cas there's a cascade of behavior waiting to happen. You just have to identify where the trigger point is. Okay,
Wow.
so I got to tell you another story. You got to take me back to college. This is ancient past.
Okay.
Uh, I look around among my college students and college kids, right? We're talking 1970s. And I noticed that among my friends, there are a whole lot of musicians, and every musician owns his own instrument, but no one owns the band's instruments. Uh, the band
Yeah.
has to have a public address system and a truck. That's the raw ingredients of being a band, PA system and a truck. So I
Hmm.
bought the PA system and the truck. And I
Mm.
said to all of my musician friends, you can use my equipment to form a band and play a gig, and you pay me with time. Over the course of a few months, I acquired hours and hours and hours of band playing time, which allowed me to put on music festivals. I
Mm.
just say, at this time, at this place, we're going to have a music festival, and these five bands are going to play. 17 bands coalesced around that PA system. And in the end, I won the prize at the university for the person who'd done the most for the campus in the 4 years that I was there. It was simply a matter of identifying where's the pebble? What's the thing? The missing ingredient's the PA system. If I
Yeah.
show up with a PA system, bands will happen. Boom.
Yeah. So you worked out which thread to pull,
Yes.
which pebble to pick up to create the avalanche.
Yes.
I really
Yes.
like the mountain analogies. So Pivotal, which is my agency,
Yes.
it's uh, sorry, one second.
Yes. You're right.
There we go.
You're
Continue.
live.
Live, live,
And
live.
now
Yeah.
And now,
So,
ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second half of the Pivot Show. We're here today talking with Tait Pollack. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm the guest. Oh,
yes. Although maybe you could co-host with me on an episode, or we could have three people talking. That would be good. We could chat to someone together who like sat somewhere in between on the timeline. That'd be interesting. But I was
and
just saying about Pivotal. We have this mountain thing because mountains have always resonated with me. One, because they look like undulating kind of data, like kind of like we tend to have positively correlating mountains to sort of subliminally and kind of suggest that the data is going to go in that direction. And we have this kind of phrase, move mountains, where anyone can move a mountain, but they have to do it one rock at a time. So yeah, I really like the pebble analogy. I think that's great.
the mountain will move itself if you find the right pebble,
Yeah, that's even
right?
better.
The mountain will move itself. You
So
just
you
have
could
to
you could
find its reason why it wants to move. And if you wait long enough, it'll erode into nothing. So it'll move itself that way too. It just takes longer.
yeah, I
You
love that.
see, you see data undulations. I see breasts. I just have to be honest with you. I look at
Depends
mountains.
which kind of mountains you're looking at.
Well, I'm out here on the east coast of the United States. We have these foothills, these things we call mountains that look much more, never mind. But
That's
the
funny.
mountain will move itself if you
Mm,
find the pebble. And I see, and I map that into human behavior. That there's all kinds of cascades waiting to occur, and the population will come to your marketplace if you have the right pebble. If the pebble is the right shape and size, and when you move it or alter it, then this cascade of behavior. You know this from chemistry. There's a thing called Le Chatelier's principle about making chemical reactions happen, that most of them take a trigger event, right? The curve is a little bump, and you raise the bump, and then it cascades down, right? If you take a piece of paper and touch a match to it, it'll burn, right?
Hmm.
It'll cascade down to its more uh, disassembled space, down into its less energetic state, releasing all that energy. But you have to provide the spark to get it to go. And the
Yeah.
same thing I see with human behavior all the time. There's all kinds of stuff that's lying in abeyance, waiting to happen, will happen as soon as the opportunity occurs, as soon as the pebble shows up, as soon as that little spot in the marketplace that makes everybody, oh, that, oh, we can do that.
But you have to move it. You have to
Yes.
actually take the action to move it.
And declare it. I come back to one of my core principles that he who declares something owns it. All right. I
Mm.
declared myself to be the marketplace where the personal computers were traded in the city of Boston. I'm here. This is what I do. That declaration. And in the
Yeah.
same way, you're doing a thing with pivoting, you're making a declaration about pivots that is you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It seems to be the thing I think about a lot now because I'm just everywhere I look, I'm looking at pivotal things constantly. So,
Yes.
but yeah,
Yes.
so there you go. I declare that
I'm the pivot guy.
I'm the pivotal guy.
That's it.
You've been listening to Pivotal Moments. You can check out the rest of our moments on our website, pivotal.digital/moments. Thanks for listening.